We are getting some breaking news in the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie.
The Nancy Guthrie case led to thousands of tips and also some bogus ransom demands. And now we know what the punishment will be for one.
Nancy Guthrie wrote it herself. Her handwriting, her words, her hand-pressing pen to paper with the kind of deliberate care people use when they want something to endure. And on the front of that envelope, in lettering investigators later described as steady and intentional, not rushed, not trembling, just precise, she wrote 3 chilling words, the worst case. That label did not come from detectives, relatives, or anyone sorting through her belongings after she vanished. It was Nancy who wrote it before she disappeared. And that one detail has completely changed the emotional center of this case, because it suggests Nancy may not have known exactly what was coming, but she clearly knew. Enough to prepare for something. She knew enough to put those words on an envelope, place something inside, and set it aside for a moment she believed might actually arrive. And then, heartbreakingly, it did. FBI sources later confirmed the envelope was real and had been recovered during the investigation. Public confirmation was limited, which is typical in an active federal case, but what was acknowledged was enough to send shockwaves through everyone following the story. The envelope exists. The handwriting has been verified. The label is clear, and the contents are now part of an active federal evidentiary process. Once investigators began tracing the path of that envelope, from when it was created to where it was kept, how it was found, and what it contained, the final weeks of Nancy's life began to look much darker than they had before. This is not some side detail in the case. This is the detail that now appears to sit at the center of everything. To understand why, you have to understand who Nancy Guthrie seemed to be in the ordinary rhythm of her daily life, because the meaning of that envelope becomes even more unsettling when you compare it to the woman people thought they knew. Friends, neighbors, and acquaintances did not describe someone visibly unraveling. She was not. Known for erratic behavior, public fear, or signs of instability that would have alarmed the people around her. By all accounts, Nancy presented as calm, dependable, and composed. She maintained routines. She kept up relationships. She moved through daily life with the kind of ordinary consistency people rarely question because it feels so familiar. She seemed reliable, present, and steady, someone living inside the normal structure of work, plans, and everyday obligations without obvious drama. And that is exactly why the envelope is so difficult to process. The person who wrote the worst case was not visibly panicking. She was not acting in a way that made the people closest to her fear something terrible was coming. No one around her appears to have known she had created it. That means Nancy was carrying something privately, in the space between what she showed the world and what she understood on her own. Whatever that knowledge was, whether it was fear, suspicion, or a quiet realization she had not shared, she carried it long enough to prepare for it. That is not the behavior of someone worried in a vague or abstract way. It suggests someone who had identified a specific threat and decided that preparation was necessary. The envelope itself did not surface in one dramatic movie-style moment. Cases like this rarely unfold that way. The details that change everything usually emerge slowly, through search warrants, evidence logs, records, and the patient process of investigators pulling at thread after thread until one finally leads somewhere unexpected. The envelope was recovered during a search warrant execution tied to the federal investigation. Authorities have not publicly disclosed the exact location where it was found, but they have confirmed one important detail. It was not sitting somewhere obvious. It was not left out on a desk or tucked into a drawer anyone might casually open. It had been placed with enough care to suggest Nancy expected it might need to remain hidden for some time before anyone found it. From that point, the chain of custody moved exactly as you would expect in a case with potentially critical evidence. The envelope was photographed where it was found, then bagged, logged, and processed under strict evidentiary protocol. Every person who handled it was documented. Every step was designed to protect its integrity and prevent contamination or tampering. Forensic document examiners later compared the handwriting on the envelope to known samples of Nancy's writing, ordinary materials from her life that naturally created a paper trail over time. The result was a confirmed match. Nancy wrote it, and even before anyone fully addressed what was inside, the writing on the outside was already raising serious questions. Investigators noted that the phrase on the front did not look casual. It appeared intentional, almost formal, as if Nancy wanted whoever found the envelope to immediately understand what it represented. The words were placed in quotation marks, giving the impression that she was assigning a specific meaning to them, not simply describing a mood. The worst case looked less like a passing thought and more like a deliberate designation. The envelope also appeared to have been handled multiple times before it was sealed. Its edges showed the kind of wear that suggested it had been picked up, set down, and returned to more than once. That detail matters. It suggests Nancy may have reconsidered it, added to it, or revisited its contents before deciding it was finally complete. Even the seal drew attention. According to the forensic review, the adhesive had been moistened, not merely pressed shut. It is a small point, but in a case like this, small points matter. It suggests a clear final moment when Nancy consciously closed the envelope and decided whatever was inside was finished. That decision, that sense of completion, came before she disappeared. What is inside the envelope remains partially under federal seal, and that matters too. In an active federal investigation, information is not withheld without reason. Material is protected when releasing it could compromise the case, interfere with proceedings, damage the evidentiary chain, or alert people investigators are examining. If the contents were irrelevant, there would be no reason to shield them. The fact that they are protected strongly suggests they matter. What has been confirmed is significant enough on its own. The envelope did not contain just one page. It held multiple pages. Some were handwritten, others were printed, indicating Nancy assembled material from more than one source and placed it together under that haunting label. At least one page reportedly contained names, though. That detail has not been publicly explained any further. There were also markings on the envelope beyond the main phrase on the front. A partially legible date appears in photographs tied to the investigative process, and that date falls within the same stretch of weeks investigators have been examining most closely. That confirms the envelope was prepared during a very specific and now highly significant period before Nancy vanished. On the reverse side, near the flap, there was also a fragment of additional writing. Unlike the careful lettering on the front, this notation appeared smaller, quicker, and more hurried, as if it had been added under a different kind of urgency. Authorities have not publicly confirmed what that fragment says, but even its existence raised a fresh wave of questions. When investigators matched the envelope's date to the timeline of Nancy's final weeks, the result reportedly became one of the most discussed pieces of the federal review. The envelope was not created in a vacuum. It appears to have been part of a sequence. Just before its creation, Nancy made contact with someone outside her immediate circle, someone whose connection to her had not been a major focus during the early stages of the investigation. The medium of that contact has not been publicly identified, but investigative records confirmed it happened. And that raises a major question. Did something in that communication shift Nancy from general concern into active preparation? Did something she learned, heard, or confirmed push her from fear into action? In the days after the envelope's date, Nancy's routine began to change, not in ways obvious enough to alarm the people around her in real time, but in ways that stand out clearly when reviewed later through records and digital traces. She rescheduled a recurring appointment, changing both the time and location rather than canceling it outright. It was a subtle move, but it disrupted the predictability of her schedule. She also withdrew cash. The amount was not enormous by itself, but paired with everything else, it began to look less random. It fit a pattern of someone quietly preparing, reducing digital visibility in certain areas, and building flexibility into her plans. The envelope was not a one-off gesture. It was one part of a larger pattern. Then, 2 days before she disappeared, Nancy made another move investigators now see as part of that same sequence. She sent a brief communication to someone. The content has not been released publicly, but its timing places it among the final documented acts of preparation before she vanished. After that, the trail grows quiet, and soon after that silence, Nancy was gone. The investigation also turned up more evidence tied to the larger context around the envelope. On Nancy's laptop, which was later forensically processed, investigators found an unfinished draft document, It had been written, deleted, and partially rewritten, the kind of revision pattern that suggests someone struggling to put difficult thoughts in 2 words. What remained indicated the draft dealt with contingency planning, preparing for a specific scenario, and outlining what Nancy wanted to happen if a certain outcome came to pass. It was not the same as the material inside the envelope, and it had never been completed or printed, but its existence alongside the envelope suggested Nancy had been documenting something across multiple formats at the same time. That point is crucial. This does not look like a single night of panic. It looks like a sustained effort. Nancy was preparing material across platforms, thinking through possibilities, and trying to create a record of something she clearly believed needed to be preserved. Investigators also recovered a text message from backed-up phone data that referenced an upcoming meeting. The message did not describe the meeting itself, but the wording suggested obligation rather than enthusiasm. It did not sound like something Nancy wanted to do. The date of that message falls in the same window as the envelopes. Preparation, putting the 2 developments uncomfortably close together. Whether that meeting, whoever it involved, and whatever was discussed is directly tied to Nancy's disappearance remains a question investigators are still working to answer. But the overlap is impossible to ignore. She may have been preparing for something while also preparing to meet someone connected to it. Then there is the account from a neighbor, first interviewed shortly after Nancy vanished and then interviewed again after the envelope came to light. During the second interview, the neighbor recalled seeing a bag near Nancy's door for a day or 2 before it disappeared. At the time, it had seemed forgettable, just one of those ordinary background details people notice and then move past. But after investigators showed the neighbor photographs of mailing supplies consistent with the envelope materials, that memory suddenly took on new significance. It suggested Nancy may have been preparing to send something, or perhaps store something, beyond what has already been recovered. The bag and whatever it contained have not been found. Brian Anton has been following the envelope story with the same persistent intensity he has brought to every major thread in this case. He has spoken with people who knew Nancy not only in the period immediately surrounding her disappearance, but earlier in her life as well. Those conversations reportedly painted a picture of someone who had not always lived with the level of caution implied by the envelope. According to multiple people who spoke with Brian independently, Nancy had changed in the months before she disappeared. Not dramatically, not in a way that would have set off alarms, but enough that those who knew her noticed something different. She had become more guarded, more selective, more careful. That word, careful, came up again and again. Not panicked, not visibly afraid. Careful. It is a subtle distinction, but a revealing one. It suggests someone who had become aware of something troubling and was managing that knowledge privately, without wanting others to see the full weight of it. A forensic document examiner Brian spoke with, someone experienced in analyzing handwriting in investigative contexts, reportedly pointed out that the pressure and consistency of the writing on the envelope suggested Nancy was calm when she wrote those words. Not carefree, but composed. She did not appear to be writing in the grip of immediate panic. That distinction is deeply unsettling, because calm preparation for the worst case implies reflection. It suggests Nancy had already processed her fear and moved into the practical stage, the stage where you make plans instead of breaking down. According to that analysis, she had thought this through. She believed the scenario she was preparing for was plausible enough, maybe even likely enough, to deserve documentation. An FBI spokesperson, speaking to Brian in the limited and carefully measured way officials do during active cases, confirmed only that the envelope is part of an ongoing evidentiary process. No details about the contents, no roadmap of where the investigation is headed. Still, Brian's view was that the confirmation itself mattered. Federal investigators do not go out of their way to confirm details unless those details are important enough that they need to control the public understanding around them. Online communities following the case reacted instantly and intensely once news of the envelope broke. The revelation ignited discussion on a level even previous developments had not, and that is because the envelope came with something uniquely powerful in a mystery like this. Language. 3 words. Specific enough to feel purposeful, but vague enough to invite endless interpretation. Reddit threads dedicated to the case reportedly exploded with activity in the first 48 hours after the envelope was first reported. Much of the conversation centered on what the worst case meant to Nancy herself. What exactly was she preparing for? What outcome did she fear most? One major theory was that Nancy feared for her physical safety. In that interpretation, the envelope was created because she believed real harm was possible and wanted to leave behind something that could speak for her if the worst happened. That theory gained the most traction, partly because it is the most emotionally immediate and partly because it aligns so painfully with the fact that she did, in fact, disappear. Another theory focused less on physical danger and more on exposure. In that reading, the worst case was not simply harm to Nancy, but the possibility that something she knew could be denied, buried, or erased if something happened to her. Under that theory, the envelope was not just a warning, it was insurance, a way of making sure information would survive. A third theory, quieter but persistent, suggested the envelope may not have been primarily about Nancy at all. Instead, it may have been tied to someone else. Someone in her life whose circumstances she was trying to account for or protect against. That possibility complicated the case even further. And then came one of the most surprising details of all. The envelope was not addressed to investigators or law enforcement. It was not marked for the FBI, the sheriff's office, or any official body. Nancy's contingency material, as it turns out, was directed to a specific person, a named individual not previously visible in the public-facing side of the case. That person was not a known family member, and not one of the close friends whose names had already surfaced through early witness interviews. In other words, Nancy was not leaving this record for authorities to decode from scratch. She appears to have been leaving it for someone who already knew the context, someone who would understand exactly what the worst case meant and exactly what to do with the material inside. Investigators have since contacted that person, and they are now considered central to the federal investigation. What they told authorities about their relationship with Nancy, about why she chose them, and about what they understood the envelope to mean has not been made public. But the existence of that recipient has dramatically changed assumptions about who may have been closest to the center of whatever Nancy was navigating in those final weeks. 2 days ago, Brian Neenan received a document connected to the case. He has been extremely careful in how he has described it. He has not identified the source, and he has not released the full contents. What he has said is that it came from someone adjacent to the investigative process, not from inside the federal investigation itself, but from someone with access to material that has not entered the public record. According to Brian, the document is a copy of a single handwritten page from inside the envelope. Not the full file, not the page with names, not the printed materials. Just one page, reproduced in a way that masks identifying details while leaving the substance visible. He has read it, and he has described it as the single most clarifying piece of information he has encountered in all his coverage of this case. He has been careful not to oversell it. He says the page does not answer every question, but he also says it appears to answer one central question cleanly, the most fundamental question at the heart of this story from the beginning. He has not revealed which question that is, and he has not disclosed what the page says. What he has said is that the page is now being authenticated, and because of its significance, he wants certainty before reporting further. He believes that when he does, the story will change. Then there is the notation on the inside flap of the envelope, the sealed side where traces of Nancy's handwriting appear in that smaller, faster script forensic examiners flagged as different from the deliberate lettering on the front. In photographs processed during the evidentiary review, part of a number is visible. It appears to be a phone number, or at least a fragment of one, written hurriedly as if added at the very last moment. Investigators have been working that number, but a partial phone number is not easy evidence. It has to be reconstructed, tested, and cross-referenced with existing records, a painstaking process with no guarantee of success. As of now, that work is ongoing. No one can yet say whether the completed number will connect to the unnamed recipient, to the person involved in the earlier correspondence, or to someone entirely new. That hurried notation may prove to be the final missing piece of the worst-case plan Nancy put together, whether the envelope was a precaution, a warning, or something even more ominous is still unknown. But investigators are closer now than they were before it surfaced. And when Brian Anton is ready to report what is on that authenticated page, this case may take its biggest turn yet. Nancy Guthrie's worst case may finally be given a name. And if that happens, this investigation will never look the same again. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because when that report lands, it is going to change everything.